Welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor-Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Irene Moore-Davis, author, educator, and local historian.
Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
and me, Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker.
Our featured guest today is Alexa Winik. Alexa Winik is a Canadian poet and writer from Windsor, Ontario. She was awarded the 2020 RBC Bronwen Wallace Award for Emerging Writers, presented by the Writers' Trust of Canada. Her poetry and reviews have appeared in various journals. She holds an MLitt in Women, Writing and Gender and an MFA in Creative Writing from the University of St Andrews in Scotland. Winik has also served as poetry editor for the online literary journal The Scores. In 2019, she was the poet in residence with the At Sea Residency in Margate, England, as well as a finalist of Mid-American Review's James Wright Poetry Award. Close River by Alexa was the winner of the Magma Open Pamphlet Competition in 2020. Alexa has recently returned to Windsor from Edinburgh, Scotland. Welcome to the show, Alexa.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I was just mentioning before we started recording that this is my first podcast I've ever done. So yeah, it's a great fun to be here with you guys today.
Well, we're thrilled. So what brought you to poetry? Has it always been your main writing outlet, or did you start with other genres?
That's a good question. Probably like a lot of writers, I feel like I could answer this 3 different ways or more. Yeah, I would say that poetry is something I've always done without realizing I was doing it. My family, I should say my grandmother, on my dad's side, I remember her as being sort of an inherently poetic person. You know, she was always sort of talking in nursery rhymes, you know, to us as children. She would write these children's poems that she would have us memorize, and we'd like perform them for her. So I think as a kid, you sort of get used to these rhythms or these certain sort of rhyme schemes that are almost, you know, in your bones by the time you're, you know, 7 years old. So I would say like I always sort of had poetry around me in that sort of unofficial sense. But, you know, sort of the way life goes, I think there was a long period of my life where I didn't go near poetry at all. And it sort of, as I got older, kind of faded away. I always was writing some things. And I think I started it was mostly fiction. I think I was writing, you know, as a teenager, very escapist sort of fiction. And it wasn't until I was in university and I took a introduction to poetry class with one professor who just had this beautiful way of talking about poetry. And I remember actually, yeah, she had us we had to memorize 30 poems in the semester. And the first poem I picked was Meditation at Lagunitas by Robert Haas. And I think that often is like, you know, an intro poem for a lot of people who realize, oh, I actually really like poetry. Or if you weren't taught a certain way about poetry, that poem, I think I've talked to lots of people, for some reason, it just like opens them up to this idea that it can be so much more. So anyway, I remember memorizing that and reciting it for her, and something in me was just like, I want to write whatever that is. I really love it. And yeah, but you know, I think my experience with poetry has often been sort of this negotiation with silence and fallow periods of not writing a lot. And I think most of my 20s was spent not writing for various reasons and complications and things coming up. And when I moved to Scotland, it was sort of in the back of my head of like, this is something I'd like to try again. It'd been like 6 or 7 years since I'd written a poem. And then I decided to put a portfolio together of whatever sort of poems I had, sent it in to the MFA program as an application, and it was accepted. And then everything sort of started from there for me. That program was really what got me writing again. And I've been, continue to negotiate with that silence, those periods of not writing. But yeah, that was pretty much what got me back into writing again, I would say.
Well, so glad that you are writing. Congratulations on winning the Bronwen Wallace Award in 2020. That's a big deal.
Thank you.
And it was for an as yet to be published book, Selections from Winter Stars, visible in December, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about the genesis of that work and perhaps how it connects to your grandmother?
Yes. Yeah. It's a different grandmother, actually, but you're right in that has to do with my grandmother and a lot about family memory. Yeah. So I can talk about it a bit. It's kind of fun for me to talk about. It's been a while since anyone's asked me about Winter Stars, but so the genesis of that actually was 2 summers ago. I came back to Windsor. My dad was very unwell, and so I was coming back quite often from Scotland to come and see him and help out and stuff. So I'd come home, and sort of as you do sometimes when you're visiting your childhood home, you open drawers and you look around and you pull out old photos and things. And I had pulled out a drawer and sort of found in it this weird envelope. It's just small, but it has this beautiful script on it. And it just says Winter Stars visible in December. And it was so inherently poetic. I was like, what is this? So I opened it, and there was these notes inside that were sort of detailing the movements of the planets and the stars. And it was so strange to me. And I took it to my mom, and I was like, what is this? Like, who wrote this? And she was like, well, I don't really know. We don't know for sure, but I've seen this before, and I think it's your grandmother's handwriting. So this is my mother's mother. And that really astonished me, because I remember her as being a very quiet person. She was, she didn't share a lot about her life with us, and her life remains very mysterious to us. And so, admittedly, I don't know if she wrote them or not, these notes, but the idea that she could have, or that someone so private could be having this enormous interior world that was in love with the planets and the stars and astrology and astronomy and all, how they move, like, that was so moving to me. And she passed away over a decade ago now. And it was quite a sudden, sort of traumatic death as well. And so holding these notes felt like talismanic, or like something was opening up. And I kind of took them with me, and I put them aside for a while. And then when I had an opportunity to do the residency in Margate, which was a special time on its own, it was just quiet. I was by the sea, and it was the first time I had the space to sit with these notes. And I just sort of put them on the table and started kind of writing little poems, little tercettes, little notes around them. And then about halfway through the residency, I woke up at in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. and I just felt like I need to write. I need to get to my computer. And I've never had that feeling before. It was new for me. And so I thought, I'll just see what comes out. And the poem almost came out fully in that night. I've returned to edit it, and it's taken different permutations even since then, but the bulk of it came out that night. And it was sort of like waiting, always, like it was always waiting to come out at that moment. It feels like, I don't know how else to describe it. It's very mysterious, and I've not had that since. So that's how it, like, the genesis, I guess, of how it happened. But I think there was just so much unspoken grief around her death, but also in my family, and my father's long illness. There was just a lot of anticipatory grief, sort of on top of unresolved loss of her death, kind of existing all at the same time in my life. And something about these notes being about something completely different, something cosmic and large, and just beyond our own individual lives. It felt very like something cracked open. It was sort of an initiating event. And so, yeah, I feel like the whole thing is indebted to her or whoever wrote these notes, because it wouldn't exist without that. And I think that's the sort of poetry I like, is poetry that comes about from a collision of some kind with art or with another piece of literature or an object, like something in conversation, that sort of an excess that bubbles over. And that's what that felt like for me. And so, it was sort of lucky that I found them, I guess. And also that I had the time with that residency to just sit quietly, because I think without that, I don't know if it ever would have happened.
How beautiful.
What an amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing to me too. And so mysterious. Like, it is still strange to me.
To say, it sounds like almost a mystical experience. Yeah. It was the act of creation,
I don't know mystical or what, but it was a very strange sort of singular experience in my life. Yeah.
So how did you adapt this work to a certain style of poetry? How did you edit it into shape?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, as I'm sure you all can relate to this, but it's sort of who you're reading at the time is always really influential. At the time, I was reading a lot of Anne Carson, Knox being one work that I was sort of close to, Lisa Robertson's work, and M. Norbise Phillips' work with Zong, and sort of artists who were, and writers who were taking fragments of other things, or who were playing around with the page, of what the page could do in terms of space and breadth and visually what something would look like on the page. Like, those are sort of the people I was gravitating towards. So that kind of leaked in that way, I guess. The first part of Winter Stars is very much a lyric essay, so it's, you wouldn't look at it and think maybe this is poetry on first look, but I kind of wanted that intermingling of prose, of something spoken and also something sung, so like the lyric and more like essay-like quality as well. And I think that, to me, the sort of contradictions or that hybrid quality feels almost like the kind of strange things your mind does when you're grieving, or when you're ruminating about things that are beyond words, and you're trying to put words to it. Sometimes it comes out in sentences, and sometimes it's just animal sounds, and it's not always linear or easy to listen to. And I think that was, I don't want to say that's what I was going for, but I think that was sort of like intuitive to the process. And then for the bulk of like the main poem, the long poem, I went with tercets, because I think that's it was helping with the pacing. I don't know, whatever the pacing was for it. There's some narrative in there. And I think that kind of helped me organize my thoughts. But what I also wanted was like running text along the side that would almost be like a commentary that you could read against the tercets, which is in more like kind of a traditional conventional form. So I don't know if I've answered your question at all in that way, but I think it was sort of a mix of who I was reading and also just the intuition of what the poem was about, what it lent itself to.
So how do the poetic images match up with the styles that you've used?
The images, oh, that's a great question. I've not thought of that before. Yeah, it's funny. Obviously the notes themselves that I was working with had beautiful images already in them to work with. I think it talks about a nursery of young stars at one point, and gosh, yeah, there's just so much in there already to work with. So that spun off into lots of ideas about, how do you describe the stars? How do you describe the cosmos? I mean, poets have been doing it forever. It's not an original idea, but, I think that motivates you to sort of return to Earth and kind of look at, okay, well, if I'm talking about the cosmos, like, how can I like bring it into a kitchen and like talk about it from there? Like, what is sitting on the table? I think I talk about like my mother making tea at one point, and like, the mugs on the table, or the maple tree that used to be in like the front yard, that sort of thing. And then honestly, this is like the funny part, and it's kind of nice to be on a podcast about Windsor, Detroit poets, but like my brain kept going back to Windsor and what images come to mind. I grew up here. I grew up with Detroit right there. We would visit there quite often. And so, I was all the way over in Margate on the edge of the North Sea, but my brain is coming back to like the sculpture garden down by the river. And, I remember thinking like, I don't even know who has created these sculptures here. That would be really interesting to know. So I started researching a little bit about, Edwina Sandys, who had done one of the which you're probably familiar with, like the hand with the apple down by the river. So these are the things that were sort of coming up in my mind, like the casino lights, the bridge, what the bridge looks like with the lights on the water. So those were in me, I guess. And I think this was really a poem about growing up in a border city. And it's a poem, a lot of it is about borders, I think, of life and death, and within family, sort of borders, like what do we cross in terms of what do we speak about, what is unspeakable. And so it just seemed to naturally gravitate towards those things. But yeah, like images in Windsor, they were like right there, kind of ready to jump in.
So yeah, you have talked about various themes and tropes that are developed by this poetic adaptation. And you mentioned grief. You mentioned borders between life and death. Is that still emerging as the book develops, or have you gone down different paths as well as in terms of themes and tropes?
Yeah. Oh yeah, great question. Yeah, I don't know if you experience this yourselves as writers, but there are certain things that just kind of haunt you or you keep coming back to like obsessively, which is sometimes maybe frustrating when you're like, can I just write a poem about, I don't know, love or something else, but you keep kind of coming back to the same things. And I think for now, like grief is sort of something I'm writing a lot about. I'm actually kind of taking a break right now from writing, or not a break, I would just say I'm sort of in a fallow season with things right now. But yeah, I'm trying to develop Winter Stars outwards, and I don't know, like I think the real question underneath that is, how do I make this into a full manuscript is what I'm asking myself right now. And I am someone who probably tends to exert too much control over that process, or wants to know exactly where it's going. And so right now I'm trying to take my foot off the gas pedal, as it were, and see with some time and distance, like how might this actually move into other territories. But overall, I think I'm really interested, especially right now, or I'm interested in sort of where familial grief, like that associated with the personal and the family and the domestic, where that might intersect with greater griefs or like ecological grief, as we're positioned, in this world as contingent beings in a planet that is dying right now and is in an emergency. How do our personal catastrophes and emergencies intersect with like larger emergencies? And I think, this past summer, for instance, I was up north for my father's burial service. He passed away in this past December, and it was sort of this convergence of those feelings. We were burying him, and also we were surrounded by wildfires. And there's just been unprecedented wildfires up there over the last 6 years or more even. And I know this has been a summer of that in lots of places in Canada and in the US, and it's terrifying and it's tragic, and it is, the result of climate change. And so those experiences, do wake you up to, I guess, certain frequencies that you see moving. And if I'm going to be writing, I think that's sort of where I want to start right now, and maybe go that direction. But yeah, it's just a lot of waiting at the moment and trying new things and seeing. So yeah.
You've already talked a bit about how Windsor as a border town influenced your work, things like the sculpture garden and the Detroit River, the proximity to Detroit, the casino lights. I'm wondering, as you were working on this in Scotland, how did the distance add perspective to what you were doing?
Yeah. Oh, I think of this all the time because like now that I'm not in Scotland, I want to be writing about Scotland. I think there's just, I don't know what it is about sort of needing perspective on your life from afar or something like that. But yeah, I think being in Scotland and writing about it, it forces you to sort of roll through your bank of memories and think about like how memory is so difficult to trust, first of all. And like, what are the strange things that stand out in your mind? Like once you've had a break, you know, like what actually remains once you sort of sift through your life, like what is still coming up. And so maybe those are the significant things. I think personally, just at like a very practical level, you know, there's been a lot of illness in my family and trauma in the last little while, last 4 years. And so the responsibilities of caregiving emotionally, physically, you know, just make it difficult to write. They make it difficult to even have the energy to think about, to reflect on anything, to read all the things that make writing possible. So having that distance, you know, was a privilege for me. You know, my mom was doing like most of the caregiving at home, but, you know, when I was in Scotland and, you know, I had my own time to write. So that was, you know, that was a gift. And that was hard at the same time because it's very difficult to be away from your family when, you know, people are suffering and people are ill, and that affects the whole family, or it did in my case. I think it can. So yeah, I think that question of how do you talk about Windsor when you're away is very much wrapped up with that experience of caregiving for someone who's terminally ill. And yeah, and along those lines, I think also it was a way of feeling close to what was happening here and feeling like it wasn't unreal, you know, like it was happening, even if I wasn't physically proximate to it, you know, and acknowledging like the emotional difficulty of it, you know. I don't know if that makes sense, but it felt very connected in that way.
So how is winning the Bronwen Wallace Award contributing to your poetry work? How's it helping you out?
Oh gosh. Honestly, it's been the best thing to happen to me in my life. One of the best things to happen to me in a year where I feel like some of the worst things that have ever happened to me have happened to me as well. Like it's sort of this strange, beautiful intrusion into my life. And, you know, for me, just the financial benefits of it are, I can't even express how much it's helped me this year, especially in the pandemic and during COVID. You know, I was sort of laughing with my partner that it sort of sounds ominous to be like the 2020 Bronwen Wallace winner, because that will always sort of, that year will always sort of carry with it like this, like what was going on at that time. But, you know, without it, like, I don't know where I would be right now, because yeah, I'm currently just in a very transitional period of my life of moving from Scotland back home. And I moved back in with my mom to, you know, catch my bearings and also to help her out a bit, you know, as she's, you know, 6 months on from my dad's death. So that money has been sustaining, and it's just allowed me to live. And I think, you know, I think often we look at, or we talk about these awards as if they're going to be, you know, like, what will you do with this money? And it is a good question, because it's something to steward well, and it's a huge responsibility. But I think what we need to talk about more is like this is the money that helps people live, like have food on the table and pay student loans. And I think we need to be more transparent about just the material stresses that are on poets and artists and writers, and especially right now in this world of COVID, where, you know, we're trying to figure out, okay, it's all changed, it's all different, and we still need to pay our bills and we still need to live. So, you know, that money has been helping me do that this year, in a very tumultuous year. And just some practical things, like I was able to move into a flat for my last few months in Scotland that had a little box room that was, about this big, but it was enough for a desk and it had a window, and I got some writing done there. And I think, that feels very meaningful to me right now. There's so much I could say. I'm just so grateful for it. I am still shocked that it happened. When they emailed me, I thought they had the wrong person. It was very confusing. But yeah, I would feel very lost, I think, this year without it. And it does feel like something just, I don't know, like I'm having trouble finding words to talk about it, just because it feels so above and beyond anything I would have ever expected. And I'm just so grateful for it.
Your winning poetry pamphlet, Close Water, for Magma magazine is quite a different work from this. The themes there still involve water, but in a different way. Can you tell us a little bit more about this particular work? What were your influences and inspiration for that work?
Yeah, Close River. Yeah. So it's here. I have it here. You can see it. It's sort of like a strange hag-like figure on the front, but it's from a painting by a French woman. It's called Spirit of the Waters, but I just really loved it. It was sort of strange and eerie. It's very different, than Winter Stars, where Winter Stars felt more like a project and sort of a hybrid project. The poems in Close River were culled over a period of 4 years. Some of them are as old as the first year I had when I started my MFA. So they're quite old. The newest one, I think, was written maybe 2 weeks before my dad died in December. So there's sort of a whole breadth of poetry, and that's sort of a different approach to a work as well, to sort of look at a lot of poems that you've written and sort of see where, like, are there connections here? Are there like narrative arcs? Are there themes that might go well together, than to just sit down and sort of massage a sequence, and to give yourself to a project. And personally, I tend to prefer project-based writing. Like I think I gravitate more towards sort of long sequences. So this felt a bit almost uncomfortable for me at first to think about individual poems together. But I had a really fantastic editor, Fiona Moore, who helped me with that and sort of, had this new perspective where she could see things going on in the poems that I couldn't. And that was really helpful for me. But yeah, so just a bit about the pamphlet itself. Yeah, the poems I think are really interested, again, in family memory and grief and renewal and transformation and sort of transformative processes. And water seems to be like sort of a connective thread throughout where these transformations occur. It's sort of interested in folklore and, human and non-human intimacy that sort of occurs around bodies of water, and water sort of as a element that is in some ways, it's paradoxical. It is, it's many things to many people. It can be, it's a source of life. It's also a source of contamination, under the depredations of late capitalism. It's a site of embattlement. Water is lots of things. And it seems that's where a lot of my poems were always kind of headed, towards water, as I was writing about grief and illness and just sort of the whatever was coming up in my life at the time. And so, it's strange because they are spread out over 4 years, and yet the same things kind of keep coming up again and again. So I would say that the sort of, if there is a center figure in the book, it's I think two of the poems kind of invoke the Rusalka figure, who is an entity from Slavic folklore. She's sort of like a haunting river spirit who often is coming back to exact revenge after, an act of violence or a very violent death, usually at crossroads or bodies of water, edges of rivers and things like that. So that's a little bit about Close River.
So you've spent a great deal of time in wonderful literary landscapes and milieus in St. Andrews and Edinburgh. Has your time in Scotland contributed to your poetry?
Oh, of course. Definitely. And not for maybe reasons you would think, like I was sort of blissfully probably unaware of a lot of the, literary traditions I was sort of stepping into, sort of even by accident along the way, just, from the fact of not having grown up there and not knowing, just not knowing the landscape, because, every city has its own culture, its own formations around like literary scene. And a lot of it was, I didn't really know what I was doing. And I was relying on people to kind of hold my hand and not laugh me out of the room when I was sharing my own work. But yeah, I encountered just some really wonderful people while I was there at St. Andrews. It's a very small town. And, I think it can be a difficult place to live for reasons as well, and as an outsider, you are an outsider, and that you can feel like that sometimes. But, I was lucky to have really wonderful faculty that I got to work with during the MFA, Don Patterson and Ollie Hazard, and my supervisor, Emma Jones, who is one of my favorite poets of all time. And she'd probably be embarrassed for me saying that, but her work was so influential to me, as well as her mentorship. And the poems I was bringing her those early days in workshop, I look back and, it's so cringy to me, but she could see what I was trying to do through the mess of it. And that was really special. And so I feel so grateful to her. And then also just the small little pockets of literary community that I was lucky to have. And I think that's, even more so than, I think Edinburgh, it has this beautiful tradition of literature, and Scotland does as well. And, you're always kind of aware of that. But for me, like, it was like the actual pockets of people you encounter that actually buoys you up and gives you inspiration. And in Edinburgh, there's just so, even before COVID, obviously, like, there was so many readings happening all the time in, like, little pubs, and, you go along and you have conversation and you find people to collaborate with on different projects. And that's what I found energizing more than anything, I would think. Yeah. And what else? Yeah. I mean, Scotland is, a country with so many beautiful landscapes, and those are the landscapes I'm thinking a lot about right now. And I'm sure that has fed into my writing in different ways that I don't even know, what you absorb. But probably the short answer to that question would just be the people I met, the friends that I met, were so sustaining to my literary practice just because of who they were and like their kindness, honestly.
It sounds like such a vibrant literary experience and just so rich that you've had in Scotland. So you've mentioned that, rather than taking a break, you're going through a fallow season right now, which is a beautiful way.
That's what we like to say, right?
It's a beautiful way to describe it. Is it difficult to hold back and commit to that fallow season? And even as you're doing that, do seeds start to germinate with respect to your next project?
Yeah, that is the hope, I think, and yeah, like when I say fallow, like I do mean that truly, in the sense of that, I think, well, let me say it this way. One of my favorite writers, poets, Anne Boyer, I don't know if you're familiar with her work or not, but she has this really beautiful lyric essay in Garments Against Women, where she talks about not writing. And she's talking about it in the context of the difficulty of writing under late capitalism, and just the pressures of living day to day that are so, kind of unfairly distributed across different people, its experiences. And it's a very beautiful piece that is, at the one hand, sort of like this raging sense of like all the things I didn't write, but at the same time, that every act is an act of writing, and like everything is, even if it's not producing something that is marketable or something that is so obviously a book, that the process of caring for, caregiving or doing laundry or taking care of kids, whatever you're doing, it doesn't have to be like domestic in that sense, but just like everything is an act of writing. If it's coming from this place of refusal, you know, of like, I refuse to be under these conditions. And so that feels very inspirational to me right now, or I feel like I'm holding on to it very tightly as something that I need to be true in my life right now, when sort of I feel a lot of those material pressures kind of riding against me. So yeah, when I think of not writing, I think of sort of resisting like the first answer or the easiest answer. And right now, you know, I am in a grieving process, as much as that's sort of difficult to say or sounds very serious when I say it, but it's just true. You know, I'm still 6 months or 7 months out from my father's death, and you know, it happened while I was away, and you know, I've only just come back now because of all the COVID restrictions. So, you know, that is I don't know how long that process will take, and I can't control it either. And so all I can do right now, and all I sort of am trying to any pressure I'm putting on myself right now, if there is at all, it's just to read as much as possible, and to kind of throw myself into any kind of book that brings some form of solace or inspiration, or feels rich in some way or truthful in some way, and to keep in touch with my friends as much as I can, even, you know, separated by oceans and time zones, but we can still like write to each other on Google Drive little poems and things. And I think that is sustaining. So yeah, that's, I think when I say fallow, that's sort of what I'm talking about, is the not writing, which is also the grieving, which is also the, you know, connections we make with our friends. And maybe, I don't know, that's maybe the most hopeful answer I can give, but a lot of days it is just really frustrating, and you sort of want to, you know, I have a lot of dreams that feel on hold right now, and that can be difficult as well.
Yeah, there's really no time limit on grief. You know? You have to take what you take. Would you like to read some of your work for our listeners?
Sure. Yeah, I can read. I'll maybe read a little bit of Winter Stars and then a few from Close River. Does that work? I'm going to read it from, actually, this is like the really beautiful chapbook that they put together for the winners. So there's, yeah, it's nice to take out and read the other poets as well. Zoe and Nina, just really beautiful poets. So I'll start with kind of midway through the more lyrical section, the part that is actually titled Winter Stars Visible in December. I'll read the part that mentions the sculpture garden, since we talked about that earlier. And I'm going to read the tercets, and then sort of I'll go on to read the text that's on the side as well. Let me tell you about this river. As it did last winter and the one before that, it will breathe under the ice like a comfortable spouse, unreactive to traffic grist along the bridge, sour notes of Hiram Walker fermented downwind. 6 or 7 knots at least, this current. To resist it, my father said, will send you straight to the bottom. On the edge of such promises, I carved a bedrock, tried desire, earnest teenage touch in minivans, glow of aqua casino lights, and first acknowledgements of the body. All the while that old Inspector God watching through the slit of a name he fingered on the windows, that thief in the night getting away with it. Bad smoke, bad mirrors, how shame enters its sculpture garden with obvious signs, half-bitten metal disc in the shape of an apple, chromatic green, heavy-handed. I am an image, I tell the river, an apparition of 2 white swans in a pasture. I was keeping to the script, how quickly the unsaintly daughter discards the body, and even now, in an airplane 30,000 atmospheric feet above the earth, the river won't look me in the eye, consoles itself at a spacious remove, carrying with it each resistance, every minor revolt. I call them my happy record of mistakes. Oh, this eye, my streaming line in the sand, like 2 crabs waltzing sideways, claw to claw, doubled back to its roots in the effacement of rage, and yet irresistible this current remains. Am I that I am? Am I that I am? Am I that dead and voided thing? The text along the side. An online reviewer reports that the Windsor Sculpture Garden is a great place to work out because the sculptures all start to feel personal. Overlooking the river, directly across from the silvery glint of the Chrysler buildings, Eve's Apple by Edwina Sandys invokes a subtle play of negative and positive space. Two-dimensional from afar, the sculpture accrues more angles as you draw closer to the apple, poised lightly between two fingertips. According to Sandus's description, a depth which reaches its fullness only when the viewer is staring directly into the center of the hand. Eve's apple is a perfect two-dimensional object lesson for the Sunday school teachers at the Brown Brick Chapel to bring to life for the children the inheritability of sin. See, no matter how dainty the hands, no matter how small the bite. And I'll just read the last section as well, just to close it off. In winter, a Milky Way once again crosses the sky from east to west and high into the north. How to permit this shovel to the earth, having emptied myself of obedient gestures, and without an answer from the lonely spruce, the river's rigor mortis. No answer bellowed from the window, the coming storm, the curtains gently shut. Every void makes room for grace, the starving mystic says. And in these rooms of acquiescence, I've learned to pilfer, to take and eat what is never offered, wintered wafer, soft bloom of ice dissolving on my tongue. If my angel arrives, this is where she'll find me, at winter's end under a Piscean moon, small as a fish in a river of tremendous accumulations. Wrestled awake already in a thawed rage, a greater love. We're under an indifferent gathering of stars, their darkest forests. I too am trying to be numerous, a bright stammering shape of an animal, reaching not towards the governance of any moon or sea, but some other outer field, where the light, if there was light, would be. So that is Winter Stars. And I will just say, Close River is available to order from Magma's website, and there is an option for international shipping. So you just have to click the drop-down menu if anyone in Windsor would like a copy, but it is available on Magma Poetry's website there. So I'll close with a poem, Hierophant in the Box. Still the world insisted on moving through me like a wind, marshaled along a distant step I'd never seen. It wanted to make me its initiate, a witness concerning in the beginning, the word that was, the word that became, someone shouting across the meadow, there is no perimeter, as the heretic's voice falls romantically from the upper room, as the quail's sonata pirouettes inside the rotted barn. But would you listen if I said the shift was gentle? That one morning I woke beneath a half-lifted window. How mineral, I thought, how still life was. The lucid air gathered like blue linen. And the word nowhere, and also wherever I was, whatever was needed in every beginning. So thank you so much.
Alexa Winik, thank you very much for joining us.
But it was really great fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.